chance at least to hear about it first. And is that a 5-minute run or 3 minutes?
No, I'm sorry.
I think it is 5.
It's not.
Okay.
Yeah, public hearing is shorter. Let's try to do things.
Are we good to go? Are we on record?
Let me check. On record?
Thank you. Welcome to the City of Lincoln City special meeting for Monday, May 7th, 2018. It's now 6 p.m. If you wish to speak on an agenda or non-agenda item, please sign up on the sheet right here. You'll be called to speak during the public comments section, which will follow pretty much everything before adjournment. Comments or testimonies on agenda items listed under public hearing, public comment will be taken at that time. Roll call. I guess we can start down there.
Ron Chandler.
Riley Oakland.
Dick Anderson.
Kathy Steer, City Recorder.
Don Williams.
Susan Waukee, DI Henson.
Terry Palmer, Chief of Police. David Dwyer, Klosh Group.
Ian Gilbert, FFA.
And then anyone who comes in, if you just introduce yourself before you begin talking, that'd be great. We have the overhead mics, which work just fine, but if we cross-talk, they will not pick up clearly, so we'll try to limit that. We're going to waive any need to get chairs' attention for this. Just go ahead and speak freely. With that, we're going to, I've been asked to postpone the construction manager general contractor selection. Ron can explain that.
Yeah, there's a processing issue that came up in the last day or so, and we need to move that to another meeting. We've got to do an advertising period of 14 days to do this housekeeping. And so we were going to be requesting of you that we hold a work meeting on the 4th of June to cover some other items. We'd like to be able to just go ahead and do that as a special meeting. That gets us past the 14 days and then do the selection. The committee that's been working on that, we have gone through an extensive process. We're ready to make a recommendation to you, but we'll hang on to that until we go through that.
You said June 14th?
June 4th.
4th, thank you.
May I ask you what the issue is, and are we still considering the same company?
Yes, we're still considering the same companies. What it was is that in order to go to the CMGC instead of the regular bidding process, we need to do a resolution which requires a 14-day period. We made the mistake of assuming that previous findings and previous resolutions where we've done that could be a blanket one to cover this, but it has to be project specific. So we've got to finish that process off and give people an opportunity to say why we should or should not go from the regular process of bidding.
We do have the consent of the council on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Does that change the schedule of the project?
No.
Okay. Police building review.
Okay. We're going to be dealing in this in 4 parts today. The first one is related to the site and some estimates. We're going to be doing two parts of the estimates. So we've done some preliminary estimates on the cost based on the design that FFA is going to present tonight. The site work is significant, and it's caused some issues with the estimates, where it's higher than we were projecting the site, plus a few other things that FFA will get to and what our options are. And then over the weekend, Councilor Hoagland had sent me an email saying, can we look at other sites? Are we married to this one? And of course the answer is no, but we wanted to bring this up for a topic a little bit. The site estimate that these guys told us today when we were visiting with them is coming in at about $2.4 million. On a project of this, if it was a normal site, flat, didn't have to deal with the slopes and things that we'd have, it would be about $1 million. Okay, so we wanted to just spend the first time talking about some alternative sites, some other options that could be looked at, what it means for the project, what it means financially. So I'm going to use the map up here for this. We begin first by asking ourselves the question, what property do we already own that could be available for the use of this? If you look at this parcel here, this is Curtis Park right in here. The Seventh-day Adventist Church and School is right here. We own this parcel here, and we own this side of it as well. It has some real slope issues on the other side of the road. It has some slope issues on this side of the road, but not as much. It might be very similar to what we're dealing with at our existing site. As you can see, the blue lines are water and the red lines are sewer, so we have both water and sewer that extended. This road is definitely sufficient inside. This road probably is. That one would probably need some upgrade to that road for the amount of traffic that the police department would end up putting onto that. So as far as the utilities, you're not looking at any extensions that would have to be done. You would be looking at some road upgrades on the Northeast Devil's Point Drive, perhaps some on Northeast Surf Avenue. And then, of course, we'd have to have them take a look at the challenges that might be faced with the slope on that. Yes.
I have two questions. One, is that an adequate size?
Well, that's one I'm not sure about. Initially, I didn't think so. The reason I'm in jeans today is I went out tromping through that this afternoon to look at it. It could be a challenging as far as size, but it may be sufficient enough size. I'm not sure. We'd really have to have the architects go take a look at that.
I guess I have to ask my second question just because probably on everyone's mind is we knew the situation with, not all the particulars about the site that we're on currently, and some of us have had questions about that topography from the beginning and the extra cost. Our last meeting, we talked about the extra cost of building into the slopes like that. And so did we not know approximate, maybe not even an estimate about how much more it would cost to build there? Because we've had the conversation about maybe we shouldn't build on that site and maybe we should find a different site. So I'm a little frustrated.
Now, there's two parts to the conversation. Yes, we knew that this was going to present a challenge, and we knew that the cost would exceed what a normal site would be if it was just a flat parcel. We also have the construction costs that we're seeing as far as the building goes as well. And so between the two of them, it's left us with an estimate that we need to discuss with you. And so right now, before I turn it over to these guys to really get into that, I'm just following up on this conversation or the email that Councilor Hoagland had sent, plus what other options that we may have available to us.
Does our property only exist in that black area? I thought we had more property north of that.
We own this green square.
And then how much of that is the skate park?
It comes out, it's probably easier for me to point to it. The skate park comes up right in here, like this.
So, I mean, there could be...
There
could extend up north, and
right. But what you're not seeing on that is the topography.
Oh,
let me show you. Let me pass
I
out.
don't recall. I've only been at the skate park like once or twice, and I know.
Yeah, so from Surf off the southeast corner of that triangle lot there, down towards where the cursor arrow is right now, drops about 80 feet.
Does it go down? Because there's the baseball fields I know at the littlest field it goes pretty step down. So, all right.
Pass this right. So, if you're looking at this one, this topography, and I'm sorry, I tried to get the contour lines on it, and I'm just not the IT guy. But
We'll let it slide.
you can see that up on the north side of it, you really get a ravine that begins to drop, and so you're dropping about 70 feet.
Sure.
Okay, on the first site, you're going down from about 180 to 200 feet down to the lowest spot is 130 feet. So there's some topography issues on that that could.
And then what is 22,000 square feet on top of this piece of property, this little triangle? Or whatever the footprint is.
That I can't answer without them doing some more exploring. That one I can't answer. When we talked about it today, it looked like it would probably be tight. As I tromped around through there this afternoon, I thought maybe not, but at this point I'm just not sure. The other area any questions on that site? The other area that we looked at, again, is up in the villages. Now, I need to point out as well that on this property, this is also a property that we had put up for sale for workforce housing, and we are working towards that. And Monday, we will be coming with a recommendation on the disposition of that property. So if you were to choose that, you have to know that affects your workforce housing opportunities. The other parcel that we looked at is the villages. This one will take me a little bit more of explanation. And I'm going to just use my finger rather than that new thing like that. This area inside here belongs to us. The area inside the larger green and the area inside this green belongs to us. Okay? This area and this area is privately owned. Okay? So when we look at what's the possibility of using a portion of the villages, you've got some issues that you're going to have to deal with. Around Fernwood, there's insufficient property anywhere around here to put a police building. There's just not enough around that development, and Maplewood is a significant drop below. And then on this side, you drop down to the stream that's down there. This red line is where the sewer line ends. Okay, so to get it up to the corner of our property, it's about 580 feet. Okay, at about $50 to $75 a foot. You're looking at somewhere between, we figured it'd be somewhere around $75,000 to $80,000. Just get that up to the corner, let alone to get it anywhere else. So you have some sewer extension that would have to be done. Road improvements you would not have to do because, of course, that road is sufficient. And the water improvements is also sufficient. The other area that we looked at is that if you went to this corner coming off of Salasy, what's the possibility of putting a police building into this area? That also presents some challenges. The water comes in and loops around, picks up here into this area, and so the water is not an issue because it services that area. However, the sewer stops here, and to bring it to this corner is 950 feet. So multiply that by 125, and it's about $118,000 that it would take to bring the sewer up to here. In addition, because the police building is considered to be a commercial type of facility, we would also have to improve this road, which is a dirt road right now. And so you'd have the full construction cost of improving that road to get it to this point.
Wouldn't it also, wouldn't the one way in and one way out also present a problem?
It does present a problem. Right. So if you were looking at, there's a second way to get out of this. You can come out here, or you can connect, I think it's clear up there. But in order to do that, you'd be improving the road all the way up.
Yeah. I mean, it's still Logan Road out of there.
Salasy.
I mean, but out, I know.
Yes, but you would be coming down to Port, down to Logan. Yes, it gets it that same way, yeah. And so, with both of these parcels, with the extra costs and everything else, unless you're really interested in pursuing this, I'm not sure these ones really work for us. That leads us to that if you want to do another piece of property, it would mean acquiring property. And any savings that we could use by finding a flat piece of property, we would probably lose in the purchase price of the property itself. Yes.
I'd just like to respond to the Salasy part of that. If that were made into a collector type street, the neighbors would go crazy. on all directions.
Yep.
That's one of the favorite spots of the people in the Palisades condos and the people that live in Cascara Court, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
They walk, and then people from West End, so I think we have it up for.
just picture a cop car coming up out of Logan Road doing 45 miles an hour, you know?
That's a favorite place to walk, so.
Now, one other thing that I wanted to point out, I had mentioned this to you is when you've been acting as part of the budget committee, that we were anticipating, if you recall, the original amount that the Chief Killian had talked about was about $1 million higher than what we had set as our budget. I think our budget is still good. However, we said we can always go up, but you can't go back down very easily. So the last thing I wanted to point out was, I brought this up in our city council, or in our budget meeting. This is the general fund summary for next year's budget. If you recall, we had two parts of the fund balance that we were trying to maintain, $1.9 million as a contingency and $6 million as a rainy day fund. As you can see right down here, we are projecting $775,000 in the unappropriated fund balance, which puts us at $8.675 million. I'd already talked about taking that funds and moving it either into contingency or into the capital facilities fund, so it's available if we should run into some problems. So all of that will make a little bit more sense, but I don't want to jump right into the numbers until these guys have a chance to talk a little bit about the design, what they're looking at. We're going to talk tonight about both the interior and exterior of the facilities, the things that are working well, and some of the challenges that we're seeing. So,
Just a quick question. Did I miss it that we don't know the minimum square footage we need or minimum acreage or?
no, we do know that.
What's the minimum?
It's on the property that I wasn't sure
Okay.
about.
2 acres. 2 acres is minimum. Okay.
So, Ron, I find it interesting that we looked at this one by the parks, but we didn't look at the multifamily one north of the Episcopal Church.
We could look at that if you would like. I specifically chose not to do that because that is our key piece for workforce housing.
It is, but I guess if it works, then I know we get rid of the police station where it is now, near a park. So, there might be a way.
One of the challenges that we have with the existing property is that, as far as I understand, we can't dispose of the property because it was part of a gift to us.
No, I mean, once the old police station goes away, that I don't know why we can't turn that into multifamily housing.
That's just what I'm
there's a
saying. I think you're
percentage that-
restricted on that. It needs,
But now you've removed the commercial and keep it with commercial.
Right, but it would limit the number of housing units that could be there to pretty minimal.
well, that's not even what I would,
Oh.
well, yeah, but there's two parts. When you look at the property that we have up on that, good chunk of that is in a ravine. And not that
The
piece.
current police station.
No, the
The or the workforce housing.
But no, talk about elevation change on behind the Seventh-day Adventist. I didn't even consider that one. So,
But anyways, so on that other piece that's right north of the Episcopalian Church, okay, the top portion, which is on the south, is suitable to be used. You start going down into a ravine, which may be suitable for some housing, but you're certainly not going to be able to build a police department on there. So if you're going to use a police department on that building, you're going to, on that lot, you probably will not be able to do the workforce housing. And then bringing that back to its existing parcel, as I understand how that donation worked to the city, we could use up to 19% of that property for city function buildings, but no more. So the police building using that for the police building works, we stay under that 19, but if we were to remove the police building, you couldn't use it to put housing in that because it's no longer a city function.
It's interesting that it's now city function. When I've heard the ratios, it was commercial versus open space or
I'll
park.
check on that one more time.
So
but,
that's a new one. That's
Okay.
actually this is the first
I will
time.
check on that one more time to see, but that's my understanding, but I'll verify that.
And one last, if I might. What are the options on trading a portion of maybe some of the more desirable spots up on the, good grief.
Villages.
Thank you, villages, for a piece of property that would be suitable?
You're still gonna run into the one-way in, one-way out.
No. Trade it to a developer.
Oh.
Someone in town
Oh,
who
get
owns
that.
2 acres,
Okay.
hey, we'll trade you this for that. I mean, we own it and it's ours to dispose of, so.
That's always a possibility. We have not explored that. There's two things that I would mention for you to consider. The first is the timing on the building. If we are looking to build on property that we don't own, we're probably going to add at least 6 months onto the timing of this construction of this building. And then the other thing is that we have looked closely or followed closely of trying to make sure that the villages, we recoup the cost of the city's investment in it, and if possible, use it as a future revenue source. And so if you're swapping it for another piece of property that's going to be used for a city function, then you're losing 2 acres worth of value. It could be sold.
But if it's gonna cost, how much here? 2.5 million?
Okay, let's let them.
$1.4 million.
A million, yeah, so, I mean, it's $1.4 million.
Yeah, let's not get in.
Yeah.
Let's set this one aside, let these guys get into the whole rest of the discussion, and just keep this as the background. By the time you finish, then you'll have much more information you need to be able to give us some direction on how to go.
Okay, so thank you again for having us. It's great to be here again. What we want to run through today is the design of the building, where it currently sits, as well as the cost estimate that we got back and sort of where we find ourselves and why. Just so you know, the design that we're showing today is what we presented to staff and the chief at an earlier date before we went out for a cost estimate. When we came back to you, we wanted to be able to have numbers in place. So myself and Caitlin are going to run through the design and how we get to what we are showing you today, because inevitably, as we talk about architecture, we've said this to you before, is it has to represent something. It shouldn't represent us. It should represent you, the community. So we went through a whole lot of research with you, with staff, and with the community as to what needed to be accommodated in this building. We're going to walk through that really quickly, and then we'll walk through how that generated a concept, what that starts to look like, and the site plan that we've all sort of talked about, and then the floor plans that come out of that, and then the actual sort of appearance of the building, which I'm hiding until we get through this piece. So when we first met with you to determine the goals for the project, we outlined these items, and we talked about these with you in council session a couple times over, but essentially a stronger connection between the police force and the community. Building should be functional, sustainable, modern, and resilient. The project should highlight community resources, materials, and character. Building and site should represent a respectful and approachable atmosphere, balanced with safety and security needs. Should have a flexible work environment, adapt to changes. Building should attract and retain talented, award-winning staff, and staff should feel proud to go to work there. When we went to talk to the community, we focused more on what made the community unique, but as well as what did the community want to see in this facility. And so these were the images that the community latched onto in terms of the exercise and stuff that we went through. But essentially welcoming, secure community, nature, resilience, and art. And then lastly, we went through a visioning exercise with staff, which was very similar to what we did with the community engagement. And basically, a lot of the very similar comments, but primarily for staff, they wanted something that was secure, tailor-made as a police station, durable, help retain good staff, and is flexible and resilient. So the thing that kept coming back to us as we were sort of starting to generate concepts was the notion of resiliency as a whole. And we've talked about it in terms of tsunami and earthquake. We've talked about it in terms of sustainability. But we also came to the idea that inherent in the job of being a police officer is a certain amount of resiliency as well. And it's the notion that on a day-to-day basis, the officers have to do things that most of us don't want to or wouldn't have to do, but they are constantly in situations that require them to maintain their professionalism and their composure at all times. And that's what you want from your police force. And so we felt that that word actually was a great way to represent the agency as a whole. And so then we went back to the notion of the community goals about connecting to the environment that is the Oregon coast. And now could we find some system within the environment that also represented that notion of resiliency? And so the thing that we came across of is what a lot of the Oregon coast is known for, which is the rocks and the haystacks and the things that sort of extend out into the surf, and that they are a constant for the most part, unless you get into millennia. But they're a relative constant out there, regardless of the weather conditions, regardless of the surf, whatever's happening there, they're a constant that's out there that's constantly being battered but holding its form and shape. And so with that as an idea, like, oh, that's great, what does that mean for architecture? How do we sort of transform that idea without it looking like a rock? So throughout this whole process, we've been very focused on keeping the building as simple and straightforward as possible, because that leads to more cost effectiveness, better able to have flexibility inside. So we wanted to keep the orientation to the building sort of simple and clean as we could, with the best exposures for daylight. And so what we did was we took that site plan, which we talked with you about last time, and we started to look at how we could start to shape the roof of that to start to find ways to channel water in a very interesting and sort of focused way. And so we took a simple box, sort of gave a gable, which we're all familiar with, and then we divided that up and lifted the corners of the building where we had important program elements. So areas at the lobby, the multipurpose room, at the staff locker room and fitness area, and then the last one is where the open office happens. And when we do that, then we shape and direct all the water to 2 key points, which we can then express in a really compelling way. And then as Caleb sort of walks through the site plan, you'll see how the notion of bringing that water down, collecting it, and then finding its way to the wetlands is sort of achieved. In addition to that, when we create an architecture that is about strength and being somewhat stoic, it's not a matter of assembling lots of parts to it. It's a matter of taking something very simple and carving away at the important locations. So we were looking at architecture and materials that are very solid and simply expressed, but then where we carve things away, that there's a little bit more refinement, a little bit more detail. There may be wood, there may be things that help warm it up. Obviously, we want to be sensitive to wood here at the coast. In addition to that, we may incorporate things like screens that help with privacy, that help with daylighting. And we'll also talk a little bit about how we're treating that interior space in ways to help it feel warm on a really nasty rainy day, that it stays warm and inviting both for people who are coming to visit, but also for staff. Anything I've missed in any of that?
No, sounds good. All right, Kaylin Berry with FFA. Should we bring this over?
Yeah. Can everyone see the other board?
I was worried about if they need to hear me on the microphone. I'll
Just
try to be loud.
Speak loud.
Okay. So going through the floor plan, we talked a lot about flexibility. So I'm going to get a little bit more into nuts and bolts, but we try to, both for daylighting purposes and flexibility purposes, keep a lot of the harder, more technical functions that aren't going to change in the middle. So we kind of put all the service areas in this middle core, so that along the outside, where the people are actually working and spending their time. In the more office environment, you have access to windows and daylighting, as well as our methods of working change, as workstations get smaller and you add people to the force, you aren't having to remove so many walls in order to accommodate that. It's about changing furniture solutions rather than reworking a whole wall layout. So in the floor plans, I'll start on the second floor, because that's where the public entrance will be. We have the lobby and multi-purpose room at one end. It's a little bit more open, a little bit more windows to kind of get that inviting atmosphere. And then we can also create a really simple, secure line where the public accesses the building versus where the staff accesses the building. Try and maintain that separation without making it seem like it's not a welcoming space for the public to be. And then on that notion, you can kind of see in these darker gray areas, these are the harder line areas of the program. This is where the toilet rooms are, the file rooms are, copy areas, whereas light gray and yellow areas are the more open office functions where people are working, where the break room is, where the open lockering is, where the fitness areas are. And then on that same notion of maintaining kind of a secure separation, we have most of the patrol or secure functions down on the lower level, so that it's completely removed from the public access to the building. So here's where we'll have our Sally Port and Sally Port storage area, our holding cells, our bag and tag evidence. We try to bury some of these like mechanical rooms, server rooms, evidence storage to the areas that are dug into the hill, the areas that you actually do really want secure, and that don't need the daylight access. And we try to provide for the patrol areas daylighting on the secure line of the building. So if you go back to the site plan, this is the front public face of the building, public parking here, and public entrance, and then here's the secure entrance for the staff. It's on the other side of the building, so the building itself is serving as the secure line rather than the public encountering this giant fence to keep them out. So the patrol work areas are oriented such that they get views out to the secure side of the building as opposed to the public being able to see into their workspace.
I think there's something that you think about. Whenever you're designing a building, you're thinking about how someone uses it, how they go through the course of their day. And so there's lots of different people to put yourself in their shoes in the situation of a police station. So there's a visitor who comes on a day-to-day, or not so much on a day-to-day basis, but if they're coming to the building, they're either coming to from an administrative standpoint, or they're coming because something bad's happened. And so we're very thoughtful about creating spaces that are welcoming, warm, inviting, but also, as we get further in design, are going to be about carefully positioning seating and acoustics so that people have privacy when they're at the counter and that they feel like this is in a safe place. There's also the scenario when if someone is in duress, if they're coming here because someone's chasing them, but there's a scenario that they come into the vestibule, they hit a button, the door locks behind them, and they're directed by dispatch into a room that's out of sight where they're safe. Then you start thinking about what does it mean from an officer on a day-to-day basis. And so when a shift change happens, an officer comes here and they get their gear out of their locker. They change in the changing rooms here. And then they come out here to the break room, they grab their coffee, everything that happens there. They go into briefing, and then they go downstairs. So all the social functions of the building happen at this one location. And if you want to get cross-collaboration with people, you do it with food and coffee. And so by putting one location for all that to happen, people bump into each other, they have a conversation, they go out the course of their day. And so as much as patrols coming through here, detectives are coming here, dispatch is coming here, command staff is all coming here, because that's what the talking about is. Downstairs, we also spend a lot of time thinking about what happens when Caitlin's been arrested. It's never happened that we know of, but if she was and brought through here, that we've got a sequence that takes somebody into suspect processing, into the holding rooms, suspect toilet, there's interview. Interview rooms are here. There's a seating arrangement right here so that if someone's brought in, there's an officer who can sit there and observe and make sure that everyone is sort of taken care of while they're here. It's still not a cozy place to be, per se. And then that sequence is if someone just comes in to check in or to do report writing, they can run back upstairs, grab a cup of coffee, run into somebody, and everything else. I think the other thing to mention is just, we talked about the challenges of the site, and we'll talk about specifically the cost, but the way that we've laid things out is that with the public on this side and the private on this side, this pass-through Sallyport gives them an easy way of circulation out and around. But the real challenge is the grade change between this point and that point. In positioning the building where we have, we've set up a sequence of events that get someone to the upper steps without feeling like second-class citizens. There's actually a fairly robust ramp and sort of heavily landscape, working with our landscape architects, that's going to have that feeling like it's not secondary. We did look at potentially putting ADA access on the upper level. Couldn't quite squeeze it in based on just the one small parcel that we had. We did not want to create a scenario that required you to go buy or somehow get those other parcels, so we were trying to avoid that. If it happens in the future, then great, it still works out either way. We have sort of thought that in this landscape portion along here that you could find ways to position public art sort of right at the end of the street, so if someone were coming up, they would see that as they're driving up and then know that that's a cue for a civic building. And then the blue area there is a notion of what we talked about, where the water is coming down and being collected, and then potentially being filtered and then off into the wetlands. Any questions so far about the function?
Of course.
Yeah.
A couple of things that you mentioned, fitness room, congratulations. And I think you said holding cells, and right now isn't there one?
We have 4.
Oh, we have, oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
there's 2 designated adult holding cells and 2 flex holding cells to allow for the ability to have juvenile
In our
cells.
current building, we actually have 6. We've got 4 adult cells, and then across the hall, we have 2 juvenile holding cells, which we really very, very rarely use. There's some very strict rules about when you can securely hold a juvenile. And so we don't use those very often, and so as we were scaling this back from 22 or 24,000 down to 18,000, this flex cell idea come up. So we have 2 designated adult cells, and then we have 2 additional cells in this holding area that can act either as juvenile or adult cells, but they're separated so that we can use them as juvenile if we need to go under barricade. So.
And I just want to ask another question, which is, the evidence room is now underground. Yeah, is that what you're saying?
It's
The
buried in
pipes
the
or-
hillside.
Yeah, it's
And-
not fully buried, but it's tucked in there, yeah.
And I just, this is obvious, because you were talking about rain and stormwater and all of that, that, just how you secure that from water seeping in would be important.
Very
I'm sure you've
robust.
got
Yes.
this covered, but
Right.
just wanted to mention it.
You want to go and turn around the other board? Got it?
Yep.
And so again, then what does that mean in terms of an architecture? So again, trying to keep it as simple and clean a form as possible, a shape. And so making those one moves at the roof and then everything else stays pretty tight, pretty clean, which gives us efficiency in terms of how we structure it and how we just articulate the outside. So we've envisioned, would you mind grabbing those other samples out?
Oh, yeah.
So there's a couple of things that when we're creating the architecture, and when we deal with systems, building systems, we're talking about the structure of the system, the envelope, and what wraps that structure, as well as the mechanical and electrical systems. I think we talked about this a little bit last time, I can't remember. So this is a cross-laminated timber. So imagine glulam beams, I think everyone's pretty familiar with those. Imagine that as a plank that is 10 feet wide and 40 feet long. And so it becomes a structural plank that you could use both for horizontals, for floors, as well as vertically. And so what we're looking at is the ways to potentially use that for this project. And the benefits are that we're able to use this as a structural component, an insulating component, a finished material on the inside of the space, all sort of combined in one material. These are generally more expensive than some things out there, but when you add up all the things that they do, they generally tend to pay for themselves. And so it's something that we're exploring. It's one thing we want to talk about with our contractor once we get them on board. We did have the officers shoot at this, which what we define sort of ballistic value in that, and if you want to flip that around, didn't perform quite as well as we would have hoped, but this is only half the thickness of the sample that we would actually be using. So when we layer some other things up, we'll want you to shoot it again and see how it goes.
Yeah.
What did they use?
We used 223, 9mm, and a 30-06. And everything, including the 9mm, went through this particular pattern.
So you were using armor piercing,
Yeah, it was full metal jacket.
full metal jacket. So I've gone and done a bunch of research after that happened, and so there are several different universities around the country who are studying this for the Department of Defense, and they're looking at changing barrack designs to use this. We actually just watched a video this morning on blast.
And TNT blast, right?
198 pounds of TNT.
Yeah.
Okay, but the ballistic is what we're really concerned about, and so we're going to keep looking at that.
Ian,
Yes.
that looks like it's made of pine. Do they make cross-laminated and harder?
They not so much in harder, but they do have Doug fir, and it would still be as soft as pine. But I think these are manufacturer samples that they give us since we had some lying around. So we've asked for a full sample for testing purposes. But like I said, the benefit is that if we're using it for our wall structure and our roof structure, then if the upper rendering is the multi-purpose room and the lower rendering is the break room area, then again, we're able to keep the inside of the building as warm and inviting as we can make it, while using it also for our structure. And for each, as you build a wall at home, when you go to Home Depot and you buy insulation, it's R19 or R13 usually. For each inch of wood that we get here, we get an R value of 1. And so we get to subtract that value out of the overall insulation to add to the wall. So again, that's part of the cost trade-off analysis of what we're doing overall.
And quick question, since
Yeah.
we're talking about shooting at buildings, as opposed to what? What would be better than that?
So the other options for us are either masonry of some kind, so concrete block or brick. Both those in our current market, because they are so labor intensive, are running extremely high. Brick used to cost $22 a square foot, and that's not me just professing my age, but for the longest time it ran about that much. In today's market, it's $35 a square foot.
Brick would perform better than that?
Yes, it would. I was shocked that
There's 2 battles. There's 9 on the front and 7 on the back.
Yeah.
2 of them didn't make it out.
So 2 of them didn't make it.
There's distances too.
Those are the rookies.
Well, I thought that someone needed to go back for marksmanship, training thing. But so masonry, concrete are generally the 2 items that you would consider. The last is basically Armor Tech, which is like a Kevlar sheet. And that stuff's really expensive. And so we wanted to try and keep masonry off the project, mainly because this didn't really feel like it wanted to be a brick building per se, but also the cost that went along with that. Concrete is also expensive to build your walls out of. Tilt-up concrete is something that contractors often recommend, but in our climate, the way that tilt-up is usually made is what you see on warehouses, right? It's a concrete panel that's tilted up, and there's one joint in between, and they put a beaded caulk right there. The fundamental thing about caulk is that it eventually fails. And if you don't have a backup system behind it, then it leaks straight into your building. So this was a way, so they literally bring these out in 10 by 40 sheets, and they lift them into place. And they're all cut in the factory to be precisely the right size you need them. We're currently using this as a floor assembly with concrete poured on top for the project we're doing in Beaverton, which is a public safety building. So this is something that we still need to vet. It's something that we're exploring. But we like what it does for the interior of the space without having to add additional layers of finished plywood and things like that. So it's something we'll be exploring. On the exterior of the building, what we presented last time was we want something that doesn't have to be painted. It doesn't have to be maintained. We want something that's actually going to weather and develop a patina over time. And so we've looked at different metal systems like zinc, which is it's like one of the longest lasting sort of metal enclosures out there. Unfortunately, it's very expensive. So that's something we've been playing with. We've also come up with the idea of using a concrete tile, which is heavy.
Very heavy.
But the benefit here is that it goes up like a shingle, and it would look like shingles. And that fits with the vocabulary of the architecture you have. It also fits with the idea of us having this strong, stoic, massive building. That concrete is much cheaper than the zinc by far, but it's something.
You do have to size up the structure to
A little
accommodate
bit.
the weight.
3 to 5%. So a little bit. So those are things that are still being in development as we move forward. In the estimate right now is the zinc, and that's one of the things that as we scale costs back, we'll talk about reducing. Any questions about anything so far? Yeah.
Back when you were talking about the site and the entrance and the topography, did you say there's possibility of handicap access?
Yes.
Yes, there's a ramp currently from the ADA's. The ramp and the stairs kind of start at the same point. Bringing up what Ian was saying about trying not to make it a secondary entrance for those, using the handicap access. So the ramp and the stairs both start at the same kind of lower area and move up alongside each other through a landscaped rain garden area.
So the ramp would
Kind of comes up a little.
would be at an appropriate angle
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
to the front door.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we have it in the model here, and
Yeah.
we probably should have put the model out in the middle of you, but feel free to compliment that. But yeah, I mean, that's really the biggest challenge is that the grade change between where the parking is to where the front door is. Just with the way the site laid out, we have a ramp to sort of get up there. Like I said, if for some reason you're able to take those upper parcels over time,
Right there.
and I think the conversation at the park level was maybe we can acquire those and do head-end parking at that level. Those could become your ADA access at that point.
I have a question for the chief. I want to go back to talking about the collaboration area. Is that true? About this is in the social area? Is this something you want?
It's definitely something I want. I mean, we've got an earlier rendition of this posted on our walls under the PD, and we were reviewing those this evening before we came over here. And there was a posting on there that is exactly the reason why we're designing it this way, because patrol's seeing their report writing area on the lower level, and then there's a sticky note by somebody up there that said, well, we want our briefing room down on the lower level and the locker rooms down on the lower level. And essentially what they're trying to do is segregate themselves away from the rest of the building, when the whole purpose of this design is to prevent that from happening. And so I mean, for what we are restricted as far as our land usage and this particular design, I think we're being very efficient in the way it flows, and this type of layout is going, especially if command staff make sure that these rules are followed, then the integration and the socialization will be what we want.
Right, it's not going to be an area where people get distracted when they have to do work, and it's like, hey, would you guys shut up over there?
No, the actual workspaces are separated from the social area, and well away from that. But what this means is that when they're coming on duty, when they're going off duty, and when they're in taking breaks and doing briefing, that they are in an area that's going to integrate them with dispatch, command staff, and the rest of our records. So.
What Ian's run into on some previous projects is when police stations that are currently in a really small building all of a sudden upgrade to a larger building, they comment about how they never see each other anymore, they never interact with each other anymore, and it does kind of hurt that camaraderie aspect. And so what we're trying to avoid is something like that happening with this building, is that all of a sudden these groups are separated by a floor or on opposite ends of a longer building than they're used to. They don't see each other, they don't talk, they don't collaborate. And then another issue, just square footage wise, to kind of, like there's a great social aspect to it, but also you're not repeating functions in multiple areas. You're trying to encourage more efficient use of each space, so every space has multiple uses as opposed to single-use spaces in multiple locations.
Right, versus dispatch having their own kitchen and patrol having their own kitchen and everyone sort of being segregated that way.
So what is the square footage now?
18,000.
I see lead and supervisor, and I don't remember there being going to be a lead and a supervisor dispatch. I thought the lead was proposed to get,
Become the supervisor.
but then there won't be a lead. So there's a room there there's a room for a lead dispatcher and another room for a supervisor dispatcher. That won't be necessary.
Not at this time.
It's a secret.
There's-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there's been some very preliminary discussions about revisiting the dispatch consolidation within the county with other agencies. And with this coming online as a brand new facility with a state-of-the-art dispatch center built into it, it's attracting some attention to be used that way. And if that happens, then the ability to expand to that would be a very, very part of this. And that's kind of what I was referring to the other night. So,
In addition, just real quickly, in addition to that, our charge is to get you to 2050,
right,
right?
so
So,
to project out.
Sure.
and I think it would be worth hearing from you, Chief, if we've reduced this from the original program of 22,000
Right.
to 18, and you're still comfortable that what we're providing here is going to get you that far.
Yeah, I mean, this condenses everything, but what I am extremely pleased with is it retains all of the things that we had envisioned on keeping as far as making it a facility that our guys are proud of, that can be used, and, down to a very reduced size fitness area. I mean, we keep our public room, which will become an EOC, Emergency Operations Center as well. And then if you look at this, despite reducing it by 4,000 or 5,000, 6,000 square feet, it still provides us a lot of room for expansion in the coming decades.
I don't see an elevator. There's not a need for an elevator.
There is, but it's just not like it's right here.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
That's one other benefit about doing the split level here, is that because we're touching grade at the top, we're able to get away with just one stair. So that we cover the exits for the people on the back end of the building, and they can get out in the event of a fire, but that was a way to save square footage.
Was there a look at skylights or natural lighting from I didn't see any of that.
So right now, which I guess we don't have a set of drawings with us, but in the pricing package that went out, there's some allowance for solar tubes in the middle areas. Luckily, this is a pretty shallow building footprint, so daylighting of the actual work areas, these areas are only 20 feet deep. So they'll be getting sufficient natural light from the windows they're adjacent to, but there is an allowance for solar tubes in these more utilitarian areas, and those are pretty effective in daylighting areas.
And that's the north and then the south,
Yeah.
correct? Seismically, was that this in consideration?
It's all, yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask a question about art and integration into the building. I haven't seen that. I talked about something outside, and I have, that's fine, but that wasn't, that's fine, that's all I can say. But what about in the public area? Or
I think there's opportunities throughout. I think one thing that we haven't done yet and we need to do is work with council to determine what the public art process wants to be. Because usually there's an artist selection process to use the 1% for art. And so usually that artist wants a little bit of freedom to determine what they're going to do. And what we usually do is identify locations for that to happen. And so we need to get with Ron and the chief and map that process out. because it generally takes a while to go through an RFP process for an artist and select them and then get them on board and all of that. So it's something you still have to do.
And we should have an idea, some parameters before we do that. We do have an art board study.
So I could see several locations in the lobby, several locations in the multipurpose room, as well as the positions outside. There's also the option to do carport doors and things like that at certain locations. So there's a lot of options through here, but I don't want to lash it down so tight that once we get our artist on board, they feel constrained. So we just get that process going.
In that same vein, is there a Native American influence, or has there been outreach to the tribe to see, what, traditional or Native people's input in that kind of?
We had hoped to get input at the community meeting on that, and we didn't. So reaching out to the tribes in some way would be great.
Could I
The input.
come back to you with some possible, okay?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Also, I don't know anywhere, if there is, forgive me, but like school achievement or community awards or things like, to bring people into the building or have a place to where it could be presented or put on the wall that this is people who have done an outstanding job or something like that, as a way to just bring the community into it and say, these are the people that are outstanding, and we want to memorialize that and your contributions and things like that somewhere. And also support bricks, if it's cheesy or not, I don't know, but something that says, hey, you can be a part of this as well, for that kind of.
Yeah, I think we identified some location in the lobby for basically display cases and things like that, but I think working with council to identify some other opportunities would be great.
Yeah, I haven't been able to attend the work sessions, and then, so sorry about that. And then any solar energy consideration?
So we have talked a lot about this with our mechanical engineers and electrical engineers, because we have the 1.5% required for green energy. And the challenge with solar on this project is just its location. It's pretty hemmed in from a solar perspective. We talked with them also about wind generation, and that's something that we're looking at. Because we're tucked in where we are, it may be more token in nature than actual in terms of overall performance, but it's definitely something that we're looking at. We had one of our staff, Raquel, who's not here tonight. She spent a lot of time researching the Tesla shingles, and in theory they're budget friendly, but we haven't actually seen numbers on those, so we're still
In
on
theory,
there.
and that's
The
the,
MEP did bring up the possibility of the hydro turbines as well.
from the rainwater.
From the rainwater, and since we are focusing the water collection at 2 points, there will be significant water through those areas to possibly have something like that, but that's also still requires a little bit of looking for that.
Yeah.
I did want to mention Troy Ainsworth with FFA. One of the main things we did relative to sustainable design is just orient the building so that it's oriented properly, north-south, so the long sides are facing the north and south, very short sides and pretty opaque sides, east-west. And with a building like this, on a site like this, that's, if you imagine this building will be around for 50 or 75 years, that's probably one of the best things you can do without getting into mechanical systems and more kind of exotic things. So that's something we did, along with, we had to push the building a little bit this way to still allow access to the existing police station while construction was going on. And that's one of the reasons that part of it is pushed into the hill a little bit, because that's keeping the existing building in operation is a major consideration and a major cost savings as well.
Should tell us something. But don't keep talking.
I know, the building keeps sliding down the hill.
Relative to energy performance, we also have done, the mechanical engineers wrote a narrative for 3 different systems, sort of baseline to best performance. So we have those in our estimates. The high performance is a ground source heat pump with radiant coils in the floor slab, which is similar to what we're doing in Beaverton right now. I can't remember the cost premium on the top of my head. I'd have to go back and double check. What's in the estimate right now is the baseline, which is a decent performance VA.
I think BRF's the one step up. There's actually 4 options.
Right, so VAV system. So that's something we'll be evaluating as we go forward. It's in the mechanical engineer's scope to do an energy model, which will allow us to test those systems to give you a sense of payback over each of those choices.
If we go to a court of record, would there be any need for any kind of different holding cells or anything like that?
It's still, we'd still be using the jail. Yeah, we are not in a position to step up to a jail type of situation.
I don't know. So that's not in the 50-year projection, that we just don't want to do that. Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole different level.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know, but, you know.
yeah, so, no thank you.
That's that.
Well, there's one thing I want to bring up, and I've kind of just not been entirely serious about it, but I've talked to a couple of counselors, and just want to throw it out one last time to see if there's any thoughts moving forward on it, combining City Hall and the police station.
No thanks.
Because we're living in a building that can't be retrofitted seismically, as I understand.
Well, there's several things that would have to be considered in order to go that route. The first is location. Could we even use the same location with the increased size that you would need for a city building? I'm not sure that we can, because I think that puts us over that 19% limit. The second thing that would need to be considered is how to pay for it. Right now, the police department, the police building is being paid the transient room tax portion that's dedicated to capital facilities. That is going to really take us up to the upper limit where we want to be as far as use of those funds. We really can't go beyond the $10.5 million in debt and be able to use those funds, so you'd have to find a separate funding source to do that. The third thing is, what do you do with this building then? And then the fourth thing is, of course, you'd have to find a location. So
Sure, I understand that. That's
those
all.
are, and I'm saying those are the things you'd have to consider.
Yeah, but I just wanted to throw it out officially, and if anyone was interested.
Thought you were going for my gun range.
Yeah, I thought
I was going for gun range.
You know,
One last time. Now that you're burrowing into the hillside, it's a natural.
Well, I don't think there's anything stopping us from doing it elsewhere, along with our dog training site.
Hopefully not the same location.
Dogs with guns.
So if we talk about other locations, what's that time now?
Well, maybe now's the time to jump into costs, so that we can talk about what that means and what the drivers are for this particular site. So, I'm going to pass out just a memo that outlines the high-level costs as well as some of the strategies that we're employing.
You guys don't get a pass out.
As I say, hopefully it doesn't require you to pass
When
out.
it comes to
Pass it out.
Big picture is that anytime that we get an estimate, particularly this early in the process, there's always sticker shock. There's always that moment where you start thinking about, well, what did we miss? What's the smoking gun? Where's the point of clarification? And so the reality is that you get that first estimate, you get the sticker shock, and then you spend a lot of time going back and reviewing it, and you find little things here and there. And then you find larger things here and there to get us to what needs to be developed reasonably. So the first number that we got back was the $10.7 million for a direct construction cost. And so what's included in that is the site costs, the building costs, as well as the contractors' overhead fee, their contingencies, design contingencies, bonding, all the sort of things that are generally below the line, what we call below the line from a construction standpoint. And so if you just look at the things that are above the line, then we're at about 7.7 million. So what we did working with David is that Dave and I both looked through it, and then we reached out to another contractor to have them sort of look over our shoulder, look over the estimate, and give us their take on things. And basically what I've outlined here is some clarifications that we've made, some suggestions that we're also making that would get us closer to 8.9 in terms of a construction cost. So I think as we do this, I think it's important to understand the market that we're in. And you remember that your original estimate from the previous study was at $2 or $271 a square foot. And we encouraged you to go to $435 a square foot and downsize the size of the building. And this number came back in at $581 a square foot. Now, there's nothing in what we're doing here that is extravagant. This is what the market's doing, and you'll find this actually in every other facility that's being built right now. And David could sort of echo that based on what he's seeing, but
Story time with the city of Lake Oswego.
yeah, right. I'll tell that story in a little bit, but this is happening because of the downturn we just had. When the recession hit, massive amounts of labor left the construction workforce, and as we've ramped back up, and we've ramped up back up in a really big way in terms of construction. You look at the housing markets, particularly in the city, you look at all the public work that's just passed bonds for, the amount of school bonds alone is staggering. And so now there's a massive demand for labor that's not there. And so when they go out, when GCs go out to the sub-market, they'll get one or maybe two people responding to their bids, and people will throw dollars at it to see what they can get. So we actually just had a small pool project for the city of Portland. That was just a pool renovation that only one contractor bid on it as a hard bid, and it was 3 times more than what their budget was. The Lake Oswego story, this was just something I saw in the paper. It was actually from 2 weeks ago. Lake Oswego is doing a combo police station and city hall, and they're tearing down their old city hall project to do that. Their budget was $40 million. They went back to council 2 weeks ago with $64 million. So we're not doing that, thankfully. But it just gives you an indication of what's happening out there in the marketplace. Doesn't mean that there isn't room for us to adjust and change and tweak, but it is the case for not waiting too long to get into the ground. Because right now the estimators are saying about 6% per year is your escalation cost. So on a project of $8 million construction, that's $480,000 each year that you're losing in buying power. And I would say that 6% is not conservative. It's not really covering what's actually happened out there in the marketplace.
So can I add something too?
Yeah.
On this total estimate, you see the 10.7, that number. So bear in mind that the other, all the soft costs that have not been mentioned, we usually gauge around 30%, as that's the additional cost for your permit fees, which there's some conversation around that too. Development fees, SDCs, system development charges, professional fees, consulting fees. There's a number of soft costs that are not construction.
Those are in the 30% or in addition to?
They would be in the 30%.
Okay.
Not to mention things that that the contractor won't buy, equipment and furnishings, that we'll have to go and study and select those too. So that 30% is to cover all that. So that's not in that 10.7. So you take that number, you take 10.7 times the 30%, and you're at 14 million. So that's based on that. That's the, now your sticker shock probably hits you. So to reverse engineer, if we were to use the the city council approved 10.5, right? You come back off of that number, keep the 30% in there. You need to be at the top end. Your construction budget should be about 8.2, no more, because that's the ceiling to stay inside the approved budget. Really, you want to be closer to 8 million, gives you a little bit of room at this point in time. But so when you see the 10.7, think of 8 million, 8.2 is where that number should have been in the, in the way that this was, unfolded earlier. So that's why, and I don't want to steal your thunder, when you do the math through all these options we came up with on the back page,
we got the construction number back down to 8.9. Still $800,000 away from the target, but we're closer. And so, that was what we did, Ian and I, and we pulled in Emmerich to help us come up with some ideas on how we can get back there. So this is where we got with really not doing
Not too
much with what you saw here. So there's a couple things that, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Well, so let's talk about the site costs and why they are what they are. There's three aspects to the site that make it more expensive than building on a flat piece of ground someplace. One is the obvious, which is the topography. And what that really means is that we're spending a lot of money to move dirt, and we're spending a lot of money to build concrete retaining walls. So one of the things that Emmerich had suggested is that they use more of a gabion wall system, which is what you see the rocks and cages per se. They used that on a fire station project recently, and it saved a significant amount for them. So that was something that's in here. So topography is one. The second is that the portion of the site, basically where the turnaround is and the public parking is currently, that's all filled, that's undocumented and can't be structurally used. That's got to be taken out, and new engineered fill needs to come back in, at least where we have the building. And we're having our engineers look at alternate scenarios where they use piles as opposed to just building slab on grade, but piling tends to be more expensive as a general rule. The last thing is that keeping the existing station occupied during construction requires that we keep it serviced. And right now, the service lines coming to this building from the street run right through where we're putting the new building. And so we have to find ways to manage that through construction. And so there's dollars in there for that. So those are our three primary challenges relative to cost on the site. So the things that we're recommending, there's a couple of points of clarification. One, they had a lot of money in there for landscape, way more than they needed. So we were able to find $300,000 just in that alone. We clarified some of the soil intent with the geotechnical engineer that saved us 62. We talked about the site retaining strategy. I put a ballpark number in there, about 20% savings. Right now in the site plan, and this is something that we're having conversations with the chief about, but this dash line here that goes around this parking area here is a covered canopy that when officers are coming in from patrol, they park under that canopy, they can get all their gear and stuff out of the rain and walk in under cover. You could potentially, that's an isolated thing that you could defer into a later date. And it's about a $150,000 item. And then this portion of the public parking from about that line down, that goes into that wooded area that falls off right now across from the fire station. You could shorten that up, have less public parking in the short term, and fill that in later, at a later point. And then lastly, as we're factoring in each of these, they have impacts to that last number, that contingency number that's calculated at the end. And so basically going through those, there's about a $1.3 million savings there. As you flip the sheet over, in the building cost, we told you about the wonderful metal panel system that we like so much that was really expensive, which is something that's like that. If we went to something that was more like the concrete shingle or some other metal panel type of project or product that wasn't zinc, it's about $100,000 savings. So that's something significant to consider. Small bits of casework throughout the project that aren't necessarily essential would be about a $20,000 savings. You could defer window blinds to a later point, or you could do them as part of FF&E. That's about a $50,000 savings. And then if you add all those up and take the contingency, you save about, we get down to a revised building number of $5.4 million, roughly. But the big thing, probably the biggest impact was that our estimators are inherently conservative because we need them to be, right? And so working with Emmerich, they looked at the general conditions, the contractor overhead, they looked at all those things that were below the line and felt that they thought it should be less. And so they recommended about an $800,000 reduction of that number. And And so when you factor all those things in, that's how we get closer to the 8.9 million.
A couple questions.
Yeah.
Casework reduction.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
So casework, which is like anything, cabinets, shelving, that kind of thing.
Okay.
There's a handful of spots where we had, additional casework that we don't necessarily need. They're nice to have, but not a necessity.
And then, I know what each of these words means, but not together.
Okay.
Landscape clarification and soil clarification.
So the landscape clarification was in the estimate that we got from the estimator.
Oh, okay.
The number was $500,000, and it was $100 per square foot in our rain gardens. And landscape architect is like, that'd be great, but it should be about $4 a square foot, and so we reduced.
Never
And
heard
then
that word applied to it.
same thing with the soil was that we clarified the amount of area that actually needed to be removed. So it wasn't devastating.
Thank you.
Other thoughts, questions?
Yeah, just to reiterate the comment about the estimator's contingency and how much buildup they put on top of the true construction costs from the estimator is not 10.7. It's closer to just less than 8 million. So all the buildup, all the markups and insurances and contingencies and professional staff and all that, I see there's an opportunity there. And some of that really is once we get Emmerich on board, which hopefully will happen here in the next 5 weeks, they will really help us to hone in on that number and really drive to the more realistic, not an estimate, but true target budget that we can drive to. So keep that back in your mind too.
So I guess the thing that we're looking at on this, if I was to give a recommendation, is at this point, we stay the course. That we do take a look at that extra part of the fund balance and move that into a contingency so that if it's needed, it's available. And then have these guys continue to do the voodoo they do to get it down as close as possible to fund.
Okay. In the question though of sort of casework reduction, soil clarification, landscape clarification, who makes that decision as to what will and won't go in? Because for me, of course, it's always what we're going to say money, and then all of a sudden we've got a cheap, crummy looking product.
Right.
Who guarantees we still have something useful, nice, but not extravagant?
We don't make those decisions without input from chief and Ron and staff. We don't do things arbitrary that way. So any reduction that we make from any of the designs at any point is all vetted.
And then the covered area for the officers, the scored area.
Yeah.
How many vehicles does that accommodate?
I think it's 8.
Okay, so it's not all the vehicles.
No, it's just in this one section.
Got it.
That's as many who are on shift at any given time.
Got it, okay.
Well, I would like to say overall, it looks pretty cool. I want to see the art integrated though, and not just, hung on the wall. That would make me just crazy. Maybe the art, this is for you, maybe the artwork on the front, by the entrance, could be an octopus.
We weren't going to say anything about that.
Well, one thing that I've been asked for from in our art and in our parks is something you brought up about the design of this, is that we have rain for 230 some odd days a year. It would seem to me that would be a perfect opportunity to incorporate, especially if you're going to be gathering rain, to incorporate a piece of art within that.
Yes. And I think that's something we'd love to explore. I think often when we have a public project that requires the art, if we get the artist on board early enough and can incorporate it into an element that we're already having to pay for, like rain gardens or something like that, that aids our budget twofold.
And I just wanted to say something else, the idea of like solar and wind and water, energy. Not only is it important to have, as it will help generate a little bit, who knows how much,
Yeah.
but also the education value of it is higher
course. And we've done just a preliminary pass at the score sheet, which is what we said we would do.
Yeah, I have copies of just a couple.
And at this early stage, there's all sorts of maybes that go in that, right? And there's a notion about, with costs being what they are, we're trying to be conservative. And so right now, we're basically certifying conservatively. We'd hit certification, we wouldn't be silver or anything like that, but it's something for us to continue to sort of hammer at.
Ron, so are we $3 million short?
I'm trying to go back to the 10.7 plus 30%, 14 million, drop of $1 million off or so in savings. So we're I'm thinking of where
Can
we
I answer that real
Yeah,
quick?
go ahead.
I'll take the first pass at that. So my math, when you take all these savings, that $8.9 million number, if you're looking at, are you looking at the 8.9 or the 10.7?
Well, I'm starting with 10.7
10.7.
and then getting to your
Yes.
9 million. I just read it.
So the
9
10.7 number, you'd be at $14 million,
with the 30%, correct?
30%. With the 8.9, you're at 11.6.
I think we were closer to that 11.5 million than
Yes.
we were starting with before the last time when we kept it down to $1 million.
So then that means we're only $1.9 million short.
Today.
Maybe not even that much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. That's
Yeah. I can tell you that over the weekend, when we were discussing this at the end of last week, over the weekend, I was a lot more concerned than I was after I had these conversations with these guys today. That I think we'll end up having to do some adjustments, and that's why for me that contingency becomes pretty important. But with all of the things that they discussed, I'm not as worried as I was, say, Friday when I went home.
You're not letting them just wear you down, right?
It's a beautiful day, Shane. So anyway, so I think that if I was going to be giving a recommendation, I think the chief would agree with me on this, is that we stay the course, unless things really blow themselves out of proportion, that we're still on track. We may have to rethink our budget some, and while they work on their part of it, then Debbie and I will work on the financial end of it as well. But again, one thing I would point out is the key driver in all of this, as far as the debt, is the amount of debt we can carry using the funding source that we designate.
With a reduction in a flatter place, you know, that, what'd you say, 1 point?
Site cost.
2.1, you know, site cost, but with a reduction, 1.3, what would you think that would go down to with an easier place? In addition to that, the down fees with the 2.2, you know, so you have a flatter piece would construct, all the other costs would be down as well.
Right.
You know, you wouldn't have to renegotiate the water and sewer lines or all those things. I mean, so I understand you don't, I gave that information 3 days ago or whatever, but, you know, or whatever it was, but that percentage, you know, what,
We asked the contractor that is who we would be recommending to you.
Sure.
And said, hey, if we just had a greenfield site that was dead flat, what would that mean? That we didn't have to, you know, keep
that
building
extent.
on, right?
Sure.
And what he said about $1 million.
Well, just $1 million just to pay for that, as opposed to 2.4 million, whatever it is
So
today.
about a 1.4 million savings.
Yeah, so took the two stations, they're building 2 fire stations similar size. I think their site costs are about $900,000, $1 million just for the site development.
Right.
Similar, you know. So if you did have just a flat greenfield site, you know, then you'd look at less than $1 million easily.
Did you factor in the inflation rate that would come for the delay?
Well,
No, that's not factored in that number.
that's a good point to bring up. So,
and then the contractor fees. In addition to having a better land, I understand it's $1 million difference.
$29.
What would that difference be as far as contractor fees?
in this case, I asked him, if we had a greenfield site, it was relatively flat, how much could you also get, how much savings would there be too on his cost? And he said $100,000 to $200,000 for the time element, because it would be easier to build, shorter time period, that you would have that schedule benefit as well. Not to mention, you know, if you didn't have to demolish the old police building, you'd save that money. Not let you do with the building, do whatever you want with it, but you don't have to come back and touch that building.
So it includes demolishing the current building,
This includes that.
Yes.
And that rough estimate of a different flat site doesn't include how many months, 6 months or whatever further out, plus yours.
Yeah, my guess, my instinct is telling me that if you had a flat site for 18,000 square feet, you could probably build this, if there's no issues you've got to deal with, you could probably build it in about 10 months, is my instinct, 10 to 12 months to build. Here, we're looking at 18 months.
Or we lose Emmerich or, I mean, you know. if
I'm not
that
suggesting
scenario-
buying land, I just would like to hear Harrison.
Yeah,
One of the
it's
things
just
that
like
I've
costs.
just made a note on things to do is to pull up the MLS and just see what is out on, if there's any properties that are currently on the market that would suit this size. I have not done that in quite some time, and so we can at least see if there's anything that's out there.
If you, any discussion with Scantha on the hospital, you know, I was thinking, we started at this 580 at the beginning. I'm wondering, because I haven't heard what it's up to.
What their
Because we-
number is?
For the same reasons that you've talked of the cost of materials and labor and everything else.
At the hospital?
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to know. We're working with Skanska on the Beaverton project, and we're waiting on our current estimates right now. But our last estimate put us at $450 a square foot. That's in the valley, that's a dead flat site, and not a lot of site work.
In a larger building.
And a much
Some
larger
economy
building.
of that.
Right. Good economy of scale out of that.
I'm gonna ask what that cost per square foot is on
Yeah,
this
yeah.
hospital, because I'm curious, I just shot in the text.
Because I know
Well, they
it's
bought
definitely the
it.
same thing.
Right.
That's flat.
Yeah, but it's also high tech, so it started out a lot higher.
Yeah.
I'd be curious the percentage.
Well, they also have to keep that hospital
Functioning
functioning
as
too.
well.
So there's some logistics there.
Similarity.
You know, 3 acres for 1.2 bucks.
There you go. Broke the budget.
Why don't we just buy the entire 23rd Street?
Southeast, no way, 23rd, that's southeast. Yeah. It's in the plan.
It's a development center out there. What would be a better place?
So, you're right. It's the best place.
I agree with you, Ron. I think we stayed the course that for the time being.
There's no decision that actually needs to be made tonight. I guess you could make, because it is a special meeting, but unless you were to say, tell us to do something different, I've got several questions to answer, but we will just continue to go forward with the advertisement out for the construction manager, general contractor form, so that we can get our recommendation to you. These guys will continue to work on their design, knowing what our goal is financially, work towards that.
I think they've done, by the way, I just like to compliment you on your numbers, man, it's magic. And for, I don't know how you squoze in a fitness room, so you'll have to tell me that story.
Magic.
And I'm not quite sure how to read this, but I can catch it.
I can walk it through. Okay, we still do have a section available for public comment, so this time anyone
I don't have anyone signed up. Anyone did want to come forward and speak at this time? You have 5 minutes, or 5 or 3? A 5-minute window to speak. Seeing no one. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, we are adjourned.
Next Monday, we'll have the new camera up, so we won't have to do this anymore. Yeah, we just got it in, I think, today. I just need to do it by the end of the week. So tomorrow we have to use these to integrate
I'm really interested in it. It's always been talked about it.
What about the project we don't have? Cedar? Too swampy?
Right there, you know, the photos I know.
Yeah.